Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome to something different. And honestly, when I saw this in my suggested videos at the side, I was rather intrigued and I wanted to see, what was it? This is When is Wallace and Gromit Set by DRK. Now, that is a funny thing to think about. Because, I've been a big fan of Wallace and Gromit basically my entire life. I remember, I think somewhere in the basement, I actually have a DVD with all of the original shorts, like the original 3 shorts on them. And then there was, Curse of the Were-Rabbit, which, absolutely loved. And then there was the Baker, what is it? Baker Most Foul? I'm forgetting the name of that one now. But the one with the baker lady who goes crazy because she got too fat. And now they're making the new one that has Feathers McGraw in it again. And apparently, also from one of the trailers, they're going to have some of the characters that were in Curse of the Were-Rabbit, or at least at least the police chief, from what I saw, or the constable. I'm forgetting what his name is. Oh, all that aside, thinking about it, actually trying to figure out when Wallace and Gromit takes place is kind of odd when you think about it, because obviously you look at it and it's kind of hard to tell how old Wallace actually is, because, for one thing, he is completely bald. And you look at him, and he dresses kind of old-fashioned, but at the same time, he's very good with technology, to the point where he's able to do, basically make anything he puts his mind to down to, when he gets down to it. Like in literally the first short, he makes a rocket in his basement, and that's ignoring, everything else he built afterwards. So it's very much, what's the best way to put it? Thinking about it, it's almost like that one, the first series of Unfortunate Events films, where you look at it and everything looks old, but you can't quite place it because it's all sort of just nebulous. So yeah, I'm very interested to see, what DRK comes up with for, an actual date of when, these shorts and the movies actually take place. So, yeah, I guess with all that out of the way, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it yet for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And if you end up liking this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because I know how it works. I know the vast majority of people who watch my stuff aren't actually subscribed, and I'd very much like that to change, or at least, I'd very much like to hit 5,000 subscribers sometime this year. So, yeah. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Since the first broadcast of A Grand Day Out in 1989, Wallace and Gromit have been charming us with their adventures. On both small and big screens, the pair effortlessly mix elaborate action, despicable villains, and a very particular quirky brand of British humour. Those who work at Aardman to bring the films to life clearly have fun filling them with details that make the world of Wallace and Gromit timeless and nostalgic, which has no doubt contributed at least a small part to their lasting appeal. Question is though, could you date any of the films to a specific year? After watching 134 episodes of Doctor Who last time, I have bravely taken on the challenge of watching all 6 main entries of Wallace and Gromit in order to see what details we can see to help pin down the date of each film. Getting a specific year is going to be unlikely with this one, so instead we are going to be looking for details that could help us pin down the earliest each film takes place. By the amount of things I've had to Google for this one, you're about to learn how little I truly know. Only one major rule this time, puns and references don't count for dates. They're gags for the audience, not actors knowingly taken by the characters. We're also not covering Shaun the Sheep. I did consider it, but this is meant to be a fun, quick video for me, and covering 170 episodes plus of the spin-off kind of runs counter to that. Right, let's get started.
Broadcast 1989.
A Grand Day Out was started by Nick Park as a project during his time at the National Film and Television School. The work on display is impressive, especially given all effects are by necessity done in camera, but it does mean the model work lacks some of the fine details given to later entries. Case in point, the books and magazines on display in the first scene all display no dates or fine wording. To be fair, this wasn't made with the expectation that nerds with nothing better to do would eventually pour frame by frame over the HD Blu-ray, which would show more detail than any 1989 television would do. One small detail that I love is that, of course, Wallace is the guy who would overload his plugs. Incidentally, the now standard British three-prong plug was first invented in 1947, replacing a myriad of other designs.
So what you're saying is, at the very earliest, this takes place in 1947.
Wallace at one point lists all the places he could look for cheese.
Lancashire, Cheddar, Wensleydale, Philadelphia, and Tesco's.
The first Tesco store was opened in 1929, which surprised me. I know
Really?
I said
That
earlier
early?
that there was less fine detail than on later entries, but there's still a lot being done on the models here. For example, T-rings have been added to the tray, and the water running down the walls of the basement looks really impressive. They've even got a little doodle that Wallace has done of Gromit on his desk. How cute. The rocket building sequence is great. It's like the best episode of Scrap Heap Challenge that never was. Here's another one that surprised me. The first electric drill was invented in 1889, with Black & Decker inventing the pistol grip drill in 1917.
Really, that early? I mean, honestly, that's surprising. Like, I would have imagined, I would have imagined, like, actual electric drills, like, handheld drills would have at least been, like, maybe, like, early 1900s? Because obviously you see them in, like, World War II, in, like, the 40s and stuff like that. But really, that early?
The moon sequences were worked on once Park joined Aardman, all shot on a set that he describes as being 8x4 in the commentary. My train set as a kid was bigger than that. Wallace takes tea in a flask. We've no way of confirming if it's a thermos or not, but if it is, the first was manufactured in 1904. Wait, did the stars just move? The coin-operated cooker is an odd one. So far as I could find, while coin meters were a thing, coin-operated cookers weren't. So if they were, I doubt most of them would be lunar explorers with arms and wheels. Wallace's rocket has a registration plate in the pre-1963 format. This means that either Wallace has registered his rocket with the local council and the film takes place before 1963, which kind of fits seeing as Wallace ends up sharing a lot of similarities with Nick Park's father, or that that particular piece of metal came from a car registered before 1963, which was allowed to keep its number plate.
I mean, honestly, with Wallace and Gromit, I could literally see it going either way. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, it could be just an old piece of metal that Wallace used because, a lot of his inventions are, rather not crude, but but they're very, mechanical and stuff like that. And, given that this was literally made in an afternoon for them, I suspect that, finding and sourcing raw materials to literally build a rocket ship, it'd be rather hard to do on short notice. But on the other hand, I could literally see Wallace, registering the rocket with the local government and actually getting a license for it. Because obviously I've never actually experienced the British bureaucracy, but I've heard that there are a lot of things involving licenses over there.
Given Wallace, I'd say the latter's more likely. However, the detail that pushes a Grande out furthest forward in time is probably this one. Wallace has an electric fridge. The first electric fridge was invented in 1914, but it wasn't until the 1970s that over 50% of the UK population had one in their own homes. It's not impossible that Wallace could have been ahead of the curve with regards to fridge ownership, which is not a sentence I thought I'd ever say, but he has been shown to invent devices to solve problems which have already been solved. He can be a latecomer to certain kinds of technology. The earliest I could confidently date a Grande out is some point in the mid to late 70s, though there's nothing to stop it occurring as late as the date of broadcast, 1989. A Grande out is probably the wackiest and most out there of the Wallace and Gromit films. Later entries would seek to become child-friendly thrillers, with only The Curse of the Were-Rabbit deviating by taking a turn into child-friendly horror. By contrast, a Grande out is a much simpler affair, but it carries itself with enough charm that you can't help but love it. There's a great deal of ambition on show here as well, which hopes you be more forgiving of moments like this, where the shake picture does a little dance behind Wallace here.
Oh god, just thinking back to Grande out, I always felt really sorry for the robot, purely because, it's literally coin operated. I mean, so what if it found, skis, and was able to, start actually going through its newfound dream of, skiing and stuff like that. It's literally going to run out of, its meter is literally going to run out in like an hour tops. And then he's just going to be sitting there on the moon with skis and ski poles, just frozen. And that's ignoring the possibility that he runs out in the middle of skiing, at which point there's a very real possibility he crashes.
The Wrong Trousers takes place in February 1992, and you can work it out within the first 2 minutes. The calendar shows a month with 29 days, which can only be February in a leap year, which makes Gromit's birthday February 12th. The last 3 leap years where the first fell on a Saturday were 1964, 1992 and 2020. Wallace's mail has a postcode, and although it matches no actual postcode, postcodes in this format were first introduced in 1967, so 1964 is not an option.
Well, okay. How very specific.
I suppose it's not impossible that the film could be set in February 2020, but no one uses a computer or a mobile phone, even when they'd be appropriate. For me,
I mean, again, there was the whole thing about Wallace being kind of behind the curve on certain technologies.
That cements it as February 1992. Well, that's anticlimactic. Let's just talk about the film instead. Enough time has passed for Wallace and or Gromit to have had wall decorations made of their rocket, which is cute. Gromit's even got a little toy of it. They both still look almost exactly like they did in A Grand Day Out, which presumably means that it takes place closer to the 1989 end of the scale rather than the 1970s end. Feathers makes a great villain in this, very visually distinctive and very funny too, particularly when he becomes essentially the villain protagonist for the heist. Look, you can see the puma from Creature Comforts in the background there.
Any part of the world, but hot. Name it, and there you go.
One time.
Jeez, I out of all things, I never noticed that before.
Tiny thing that bothers me though, the glove that he wears has 3 fingers and a thumb, whereas people in the Wallace and Gromit films have 4 fingers and a thumb, apart from Gromit. Who is that glove actually for? The animation is a big step up from A Grand Day Out. The water is especially cool. When Gromit cries, it almost looks like an old black and white film using a catch light. The standout moment for the animators has to be the
probably
toy
did.
So this is insanely impressive, as well as being insanely silly in the best way.
Honestly, I mean, granted, like, I'm saying this as a massive foamer, but I mean, of course, like, the train chase with the model trains was always my absolute favorite part. But I also just love, again, this is the Wallace and Gromit universe, so you don't know which it is, but either, it's just the camera making things look fast and epic, or those trains are going at like 1,000,000 miles an hour. And again, knowing Wallace and like whatever tinkering he's done on them, either one of those possibilities is equally true.
I wonder if that's the same moveset from the basement in the first film. This would make a sick model railway diorama with a difference, and for once an actual factual manufacturer agrees with me. I might even get it one day when I'm not poor.
God, yeah, I know the feeling.
After the handy and convenient clues in The Wrong Trousers, we're back to guesswork for a close shave. For example, we see multiple newspapers, but we don't see any dates. This one even has a weather line for Bristol instead, Bristol being where Arbin is based. I did wonder if we were onto a clue here, but apparently every year has a Friday 17th at some point, so that doesn't help.
Friday the 17th. Yeah, yeah, I don't think that one's as well known as Friday the 13th.
Presumably enough time has passed for Wallace to completely rebuild the upper story of the house. Wallace's bedroom is still in the same layout as in The Wrong Trousers, but it now deposits him on the other side of the dining room. This is presumably to make the porridge joke work better, and after this Wallace will remain on this side of the dining room in all future morning sequences. I couldn't tell you whether it's intentional or not, but the crew have done a very good job of keeping everything a lot more ambiguous in terms of the date. About the biggest clue we have is that Wallace is still using a landline, which presumably keeps this short in the 90s. Preston makes a great antagonist in this. Nick Park describes the ending as maybe feeling rushed on the commentary, but I absolutely love the madcap energy of the sequence. It just does not let up. This short also sees the first guest voice actor in a Wallace and Gromit film, and Anne Reid does a great job of matching Peter Salas's energy. I'll be honest, it took me until writing the script to realise that it's the same Anne Reid who did 2 Doctor Who's and was Leslie Diller. I also love the step up in animation. Every film gets better than the previous one. I love how much they lean into the Thunderbird style gadgetry, and the plane chase is such fun.
God, I swear. Honestly, like, unless, and granted, I know the whole thing is, Wallace and Gromit, wacky madcap adventures, stuff like that, but I'd honestly love to be a fly on the wall in the room when Wallace and Gromit were talking about, oh hey, we're gonna have like the motorcycle sidecar turn into a plane. What kind of gadgets are we gonna put into it? Oh, I know. How about the porridge shooting turret?
duo's first feature-length adventure sees them plunged into a pastiche of old horror films. To fill out the cast to help them fill that feature-length runtime, they end up drawing stock characters from older horror movies as well, so it gives the whole film a feeling of being set in a slightly earlier period than the other shorts thus far. For example, you've got the older priest who's the first to get attacked by the monster, or Peter Kay's PC Macintosh dressed in a police uniform predating the 1994 change that introduced stab vests for patrolling officers. This even extends to minor details. You could just read the tax disc on Wallace's van as being from 1953. I wonder if the fact the film was being made for DreamWorks ended up leading to the more retro feel with this one. The commentary with Nick Park and Steve Box constantly mentions how things are being amended at their request, and Nick Park has spoken afterwards about the difficult working relationship he ended up having with DreamWorks Animation.
Yeah, that's one of those things. It was what was it? It was this and Flushed Away, I believe, were with DreamWorks, and then like, I think originally, what was it, like a 4 or 5 movie deal, but it stopped after 2. But honestly, the idea that Curse of the Were-Rabbit might be a prequel to all the other shorts, that is odd. That is really odd. Either that, or this might be just one of those weird instances where you have like a relatively small or relatively large, town just in the middle of nowhere that's just sort of behind the times, behind everything else. Because like technology doesn't spread out evenly and stuff like that.
Side note, if DreamWorks and Aardman could play nice so we could get some Blu-rays of this film, that would be absolutely amazing. I need to see those fingerprints left on the models between shots. Same goes for Chicken Run. It annoys me that I can't see one of my favourite films in high def. The 1953 date for Wallace's van doesn't seem to be contradicted by any other individual detail in the film itself, up until we look at the main characters. For example, Wallace has gained enough weight to become stuck in the ceiling during the morning sequence. The wrong trousers implies this might be the first time that the morning sequence is used.
That went as well as could be expected, didn't it? Though I might have to make a small adjustment to the drop. A touch painful on re-entry.
Whilst by a close shave, it's become familiar enough for Wallace to enjoy it. Leading to this variation on the gag. We already know that The Wrong Trousers is set in 1992, so this would seem to be an error. Either that or Wallace is about to receive a very angry letter from the DVLA. We're also, for the first time, given a little clue as to how old Wallace might be. Enough time has passed for Wallace to have lost his hair. You can also see that adorable photo of Gromit with the cake in the following film, A Matter of Life and Death.
Oh, God. Again, those pictures are absolutely adorable. And I of course love, Wallace's, quote-unquote modern design, but I love the idea that at one point he just had this absolutely gigantic bushy mustache.
Despite having done some first-hand research on the topic of hair loss, I neglected to record the results at the time, so a little bit of guesswork's going to have to be involved here. We can see Wallace hasn't gone grey by the time he's gone bald, so presumably it happened relatively young. His voice actor, Peter Sallis, was 67 at the time of A Grand Day Out, and does give Wallace's voice a warmth you may associate with older characters, but 67 feels a bit old to me combined with the lack of greying in Wallace's hair. There's also how old Gromit is. Wikipedia states
he's
he's
a dog.
Beagle, although I have no idea where they're pulling that from. The photo montage is the first time we ever get a glimpse of him as a puppy, so we can presume that he's an adult in the present. Let's assume 3 or 4. That gives 3 or 4 years for Wallace to have lost his hair. There is no consistent age where men begin to turn grey. My dad didn't start going grey until his 40s, whereas I've noticed more and more of them at age. Shall we assume Wallace started losing his hair in his late 30s?
That's actually one of those things. I have heard, granted, it varies case by case, but I have generally heard that if you have your hair by the time you're 30, you'll generally keep it for the rest of your life. But I know both my grandparents had their hair pretty far into life. Though that being said, I know for a fact that if you want to keep better track of whether you're going to have your hair, you have to look at the men on your mother's side.
Making him around 40 by series start. This is probably the weakest outing for Wallace and Gromit for me. I don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination, but there's something off for me here that I find difficult to put my finger on. Possibly the shift to horror and supernatural parody rather than the thriller style of the previous films. The film's not as tight as it may be, and it takes a while longer to get going properly than the shorts, understandably. That said, I always love the model work on display, and there are several gags and silly jokes in this I love.
Just stay right where you are, your ladyship, and we'll be with you in a... nah.
As I said before, I'd still absolutely love to get a HD version of this. I so badly want to scan the frames for extra Easter eggs. Please, Arvin, please.
Get an angry mob supplies, love it.
As with A Close Shave, we get no details as to when this film is set, at least that I could work out. The Bakelite advertising seems to be 70s retro, but that could be said for quite a few things in the Wallace and Gromit films. It must be set a good while after the previous film, as Wallace has been able to turn the top of his house into a windmill. I love all the Wallace and Gromit films, but this one might be my favourite. It's giving The Wrong Trousers a run for its money at the very least. Paella is a big part of that. She's easily the series' darkest villain. If Feathers McGraw is a love-to-hate villain, Paella is just hate. It's a difficult role to get right, that mix of darkness and humour, but Sally Lindsay pitches it absolutely perfectly. Fluffles also plays a massive part in making Paella effective. The animators did such a good job with her body language throughout, and her aliens moment at the end is amazing. It's also the final involvement of writer Bob Baker with Wallace and Gromit, who co-created with Dave Martin K9 in Doctor Who. Only other thing I'll add is that I love Gromit's brain specs.
You don't even need them. You just think they make you look a bit clever.
Oh god.
Vengeance Must Foul seems to take place a long period of time after the other films. This is not only stated in the opening caption, but is confirmed by other details. For the first time in a Wallace and Gromit film, we have returning characters other than the title duo, with Feathers McGraw, again, three-fingered glove, four-fingered humans. Who is that glove for?
I mean, given, Gromit's case with only having 3 fingers, I very much imagine that there may be enough sentient sentient dogs in this world that they just actually make them like gloves and stuff like that.
And PC Macintosh, who has gone grey since the last time we saw him. We also see a brief scene set during The Wrong Trousers, showing that he was well on the way to going bald then. So presumably a few years passed between that and Curse of the Were-Rabbit and Curse of the Were-Rabbit in this. Wallace, however, has not aged a day, still looking the 40-ish he's always been for the whole series. I need that man's skincare routine. Feathers has been keeping it.
I mean, it also might be just, lack of stress. I mean, from everything we've seen, Wallace does not seem to get stressed about very many things. I mean, granted, there are times, but he's very much like, if the average is here, Wallace is usually somewhere up here at the very least. So, just the lack of stress probably does it as well.
A tally in sevens of how long he's been in the zoo. There's no clear shot of all of them, but doing a very rough count, I got to at least 272 tallies, which means that he's been in that cell at least 5 and a bit years, assuming that he had to mark every day. Thus far, that puts us at least in 1997. Wallace is still using a cathode ray tube television, so that works. Enough time has to have passed for Wallace to have completely rebuilt the top of his house. Again. Which also gives him the opportunity to install this apparently infinite bathroom. I love that he's got a picture of a traction engine on the wall there. Good lad. Talking of steam power, the train at the end of the film is very accurate indeed. The engine looks to be a J72 from the Northeastern Railway, the wagons all look accurate to British stock, and the details around the line side all look correct, ignoring the signal that points up for danger. Steam stopped being used on Britain's main lines in 1968, so maybe this is a preserved railway? The plot follows Wallace's invention of Norbot. Wallace says this at one point.
AI lad.
I did wonder if he was just being particularly northern here, but I did check the BBC subtitles. He is actually saying AI, which was a term first coined in the 1950s by John McCarthy.
Oh god, that is the one. You gotta love when people speak in really thick regional accents like that. I love the fact that when he can specifically say AI, and you're not sure if he's actually talking about artificial intelligence. Oh god.
Norbot also has a standby symbol on its back of the type standardized by the IEC in 1973. There's 2 details that push this adventure much further forward in time though. Firstly, Wallace's van no longer has a tax disc, which stopped being a requirement in the UK from 2014 onwards. Given the oddities around Wallace and vehicle licensing we've seen before, we could discount it were it not for this joke. This is a reCAPTCHA, which is a weird word to say. A completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart, specifically the V2 version, which included images, which was introduced during the 2010s. In conjunction with the tax
that pushes the movie really far into the future, quote unquote.
This means at least 22 years have passed between The Wrong Trousers and Vengeance Most Foul. It's a wonder that turnip hasn't gone off. That said, this follows in the tradition of The Curse of the Were-Rabbit of the feature films, adding in contradictory elements. Both Wallace's and Mackintosh's magazines cost 1 and 6, i.e. pre-decimal money, pounds, shillings and sixpence. The UK moved over to a decimal system in 1971. Before we finish up, I'll just note that I love how much detail has been put into everything here. There's visual gags and Easter eggs in so much of the film, and if Armin could sort a Blu-ray release for this one so I could
£1,000, is that all?
catch them all too, that would be ace, thank you. It's clear from the tone of the other films that Nick Park is a Hitchcock fan, and he gets to have his birds moment here with the Norbots. Finally, one detail of Mukherjee's locker is that she has a Blue Peter badge, which is the kind of thing that only nerds have.
Oh god, the shorts, I love these.
First up, I'm not discussing the games here. For Grand Adventures, it's because I'm poor. Very poor. For Project Zoo, I did find a version of it online, but it barely ran on my computer, which is 100% the reason we're not covering it, and not at all because I was being bested by a game for children. I am not a gamer. The comics from the 90s consider the shorts to have taken place in their respective broadcast years. Crackers in Space, published in 1999, states in its blurb that Wallace and Gromit went to space 10 years ago, i.e. 1989. Supporting this, The Lost Slipper shows 100 years in the future to be 2096, putting the present year as 1996. This changes to 2098 and 1998 for the audio versions. Side note, they also keep Gromit's birthday as February in the audio version of Crackers in Space, which is neat. It's also stated that soon he'll be old enough to vote in dog years. Keeping with the pop culture accurate but factually inaccurate conversion rate of 7 years to 1, this would make Gromit about 2.5, so round that up to 3, which actually works out quite well with our earlier estimates. I remember reading these as a kid. These were actually quite a lot of fun, and it was quite nice to revisit them as well. There's even a little bit in one of them where Wallace gets impressed by a mechanical gnome, which ends up being a bit prophetic. There's also the Cracking Contraption shorts, which were released between A Close Shave and The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, which gives us a few more clues. In Turbo Diner, Wallace has to put some coins in the electric meter, this type being almost entirely gone by the mid-90s. In Telescope, Wallace is still using a...
I always found that really odd. Granted, I've never known how they kept track of how much power you used here, especially before they had, like, the wireless boxes that send out signals and stuff like that. But the fact that your house could technically be classified as being coin-operated always really threw me off. At least, you know, in the British sense.
A CRT TV, which is apparently broadcasting exclusively in black and white. In fact, to this day, you can still get an exclusively black and white TV license in the UK.
Well, I mean, that being said, it could also be just the fact that, you know, it might be cheap. I mean, just talking with my mom, and I mean, she's you know, pretty old. I say pretty old, but like she's old enough that when she was like a teenager, they watched the first moon landings and stuff like that. And they had a whole bunch of people coming over to their house, and somebody literally asked, "Oh, why are you watching it in black and white?" And she literally had to tell the guy, "It's because it's a black and white TV. They couldn't afford the color TV because they were a lot more expensive." So he might have literally been holding onto that black and white TV for a long time because, you know, it still works.
Not related to the date, Christmas Cardomatic is the only explicitly Christmas-themed animation featuring the pair, which is surprising seeing as they have such a strong association with being broadcast on or around then. There's also Shopper 13, which I'm highlighting not only for those great Thunderbird 2 trees, but for the fact that Wallace doesn't actually pay for the cheese or bread at any point.
Nasty, crooked, thieving little toe rag!
And finally, just to show off how little I know about football...
Watch out for me knobby styles, Gromit.
Nobby style.
Tom Finney. It's a rocket from Jet Hurst. Shankly. Pongo Waring. Stanley Matthews.
All I was able to gather from this was that the players mentioned were active between the 30s and the 80s. Football is really not my area of expertise.
Just starts yelling out various sports star names. Oh god, I need to watch these again. It's been so long.
So where does that leave us? When are the Wallace and Gromit films set? The answer appears to be the 90s, although there are one or two inconsistencies. The key piece of evidence we end up with that locks in the date is that calendar from The Wrong Trousers, which, given that the short would have been in production during 1992, it wouldn't surprise me that a calendar from that year had been copied by a prop maker for reproduction, rather than intending to specifically set the film in the present day. The timeline appears to float forward as Wallace and Gromit never age, whilst PC Macintosh is allowed to age significantly between his two appearances. As to the inconsistencies, it's probably worth remembering that Nick Park states his influences as being things like Tintin and the Beano in the audio commentaries, and he also states that the character of Wallace ends up sharing quite a lot of similarities with his own father. These are all things that he's drawing on from his childhood, and it wouldn't surprise me that things like the old tax disc or Prude Decimal Prices might be nods back to him to that period. The filmmakers, as well as including impressive amounts of detail, have also been careful not to push Wallace and Gromit into too contemporary a world. Would it surprise you that Vengeance Most Foul was the first time we see a computer on screen in a Wallace and Gromit film? And even then it looks like it came from the 90s.
Yeah, it is. Thinking about it, every piece of technology we've ever seen in the shorts, other than these computers, were, always very, lack of a better term, analog, with like big dials and levers and big clicky buttons. That's the kind of technology I like.
Even one of the jokes that pushes the timeline furthest forward is linked back to the series' very first installment. If I'm right that the retro styling of these films is, at least in part, due to Nick Park's childhood memories, I actually think that's quite a lovely thing, that something that has its roots in nostalgia for him now holds a place of nostalgia for multiple generations of viewers.
15 love!
Honestly, that was wonderful. Again, I really do need to watch the Wallace and Gromit shorts again. It's been so long. But yeah, I mean, they take place generally when they, but yeah, the answer of, they generally came out when they were released and sort of just in the 90s after that. I mean, I'm happy with that answer. Yeah, I really don't have anything else to say on the topic. But I really like that video. So, I mean, I'm subscribing to DRK, and if you like this, go over and subscribe to them yourself. But, yeah, with all that out of the way, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.